Hello and welcome to Head Above the Clouds podcast with me, Alice G.
And me, Jay Poltney. We're here to have open and honest conversations about mental illness and hopefully give some advice about how to keep your head above the clouds.
Hello and welcome to another episode with Head Above the Clouds. This week I'm flying solo without Jade due to COVID restrictions. Although they're being lifted, we are still pretty conscious at the moment of minimising travel. With that being said, it's actually great to be back in the studio recording the rest of Series 1, and boy have we got some incredible guests coming your way. This week we are joined by Michelle Elman, a life coach, writer and activist. Michelle is probably most known for her Instagram campaign, Scarred Not Scared, alongside her latest book, The Joy of Being Selfish. Michelle delves into ways to help readers reclaim their life through boundaries, and ultimately it's the pick-up energy we all need when it comes to self-love and self-care. Michelle has had one hell of a busy year already, launching her new book, The Joy of Being Selfish, and hosting her very own podcast series, In All Honesty. So it's great to steal her away just for an episode with us, and we are so excited to have you here, Michelle. Hello, Michelle. So lovely to have you with us, talking all about mental health and what you've been up to, even in lockdown.
So lovely to be here. I was just saying that this is my first in-person recording, which is quite exciting.
It's so exciting. I feel like we've been stuck inside forever. How many months has it been, this one? 3 months?
I don't know. I still remember the first one being 5 months. So then I've been living alone. So I've been alone.
Oh my God. How have you found it? Because I've been around people the whole time. Luckily, I was with my parents in the first lockdown, shielding. And then the second one, I was back in London, my flatmate.
I must say, I think the hardest thing about being alone is that anyone who's not been alone finds it really hard to conceive of it. So like at first I was getting a lot of like checking in and like, are you okay? And then people kind of went, oh, well, you're used to being alone. And I'm like, do you understand what it's like to not see a human for like 3 weeks? Because like at certain points I was going for a walk once a week with a friend, but at certain points there was one point where I didn't see a human for like 3 weeks. And it's does a very strange thing to your mind. And I got to the point where I was just using FaceTime a lot, but the impact on your mental health definitely after the first lockdown. I was kind of good for the first 3 months, but it was the last 2 months of the first lockdown. I felt like I spent the rest of last year recovering that, kind of got to a good place in November, and then they announced that second lockdown, and I won't lie, I just burst out crying and was like, I can't do it again, and not even for a month. And so I locked down with people in the second lockdown, and then this lockdown, the third one, God, it's been quite a year. I had my book to publish. So I was like, ideally, I don't want to lock down alone, but my book's coming out. I need to be in good internet. The only option I had to lock down with people was in the middle of the country where the internet wasn't great. So I was just like, you know what? I'll be busy with work. It'll be fine. It's not been the easiest, especially around book publication. You want to be able to celebrate with people, and also the like emotions and the stress around it you want people to talk to. It definitely felt like the stress of book publication was so much more intense just because I had nothing to like distract me. Because if I went for a walk with a friend or usually you would go out for dinner, like you don't think about work for that evening, whereas it was all work all day, every day, and it felt like there was no stop to it. But as soon as book press slowed down, I was kind of like, okay, mental health time. Fix this, let's go back to like a good steady medium. But it's been a journey, so but I think it has for everyone.
I think everyone, as you say, has like had their own kind of go with it and their own kind of journey with it 100%, and people are trying to find their footing. I don't think there's anyone who's kind of taken off and found this super easy.
No, and I also think we're all doing it at different paces. Even right now as the world's opening up, some people are finding it easier, jumping straight into it. Some people are still living life like they were last week and being more cautious. And however you do it is the right way to do it. Like, this is an unprecedented, we all hate that word, but like unprecedented situations, which means we are having unprecedented emotions as well.
100%. I mean, I was so excited to kind of jump back in, but I knew for me that was not going to be a good idea. As much as I would like to have done it, I went to, I think it was the pub on like Wednesday or something.
I've still not been to a pub.
Oh,
I've not even been to a restaurant yet.
It was the weirdest, honestly. I went with my flatmate, and she is a frontliner, so she's worked the whole time. So she was there kind of like just kind of getting into it and all feeling normal. I was just sat there like, what is going on? This is so strange. Like the whole thing just felt abnormal. It's like I'd never done it before.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I'm sure you'll feel this when you go out at some point.
Well, so I made no plans for this week to... Actually, no, that's not true. I did make a plan for Monday for a date, but he ended up getting COVID. So
Oh, no.
that date got cancelled. Apart from that, I made no plans to change this week in any way. But it seems like the world opening up has still impacted my day-to-day, like even just with like meetings like this where like they're in person rather than we would have recorded this over Zoom, like things have changed this week, even though I've made nothing conscious. Made no conscious changes in my own life. It's just naturally happened. And I've actually just said on my Instagram, like, if anyone's struggling with this weekend week, then I am too. Like, you're not the only one. I just find that this week especially has just been like chaotic is the word I'm using, where like it feels like I'm juggling a million different things because you're trying to keep up all the good routines you had in the pandemic, then you're adding in, for me it's been work, and then also adding in all the stuff I was doing while work was quiet, so like podcast recording, and I'm trying to do all those things at the same time. And frankly, it's a Friday today and I'm really looking forward to the weekend.
Do you know what? I don't blame you. And I think it's a lot of pressure because everyone, I mean, I found in lockdown a lot of pressure to keep up with everything.
Yeah.
You know, you got Zoom calls here and there for work. You're struggling with the boundaries of finishing your day because you're at home. I mean, I do that anyway, but it's still a struggle.
Yeah.
And then you've got the pressures of, you know, Zoom quizzes and this Zoom and do you want to chat on the phone? And I felt like it was relentless at times.
Well, I think this is why this week I've been so stressed, is because like I've been alone, right? So I've relied on like a lot of 1 hour, 2 hour FaceTime conversations. And all those people are still calling me. So like this morning, one of them was calling me and was like, called me 4 times trying to get me. But normally in the pandemic, absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Was doing this all the time. We were doing it to each other. And then I was like, oh, I'm on the way to this. I'm on the way to that. Can I call you back there? And I'm like... oh, I can't, I don't have the time. Or it's even something like, I've been talking to my dad in the pandemic every day. I didn't remember that before the pandemic, I didn't speak to him every day. And now I'm like, this week especially, I'm like, oh, that's why I didn't speak to him every day. I don't have time to speak to him every day. And like, it's funny because we're also in a point where we're almost reevaluating what do we actually want, because I love the fact I spoke to my dad every day in the pandemic. I almost want to keep that. Is it realistic? I don't know. Like maybe it needs to go to like 5 times a week, but we're all figuring this out. And I don't want everything to disappear from the pandemic. Like I do think there were some good lessons that I want to embed and change into my life, but actually practically doing that this week has been like spinning plates.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like finding, you know, that happy medium, but it's tough because part of me is terrified that we're going to go back to how we were before, because for me I wasn't in a healthy space. You know, I was working too much, wasn't well, so you were factoring all of that, the treatments, everything. And I think we've made some significant changes in some very good ways, you know, whether it's talking about mental health a bit more, which is already talked about but not enough, or people learning their boundaries, which you're the queen of. I mean, you've written a book on it.
I know, I like making that joke now. I'm like, oh, well, I literally wrote the book on boundaries.
But you know what? That's honestly, it's good for me because to hear that from you, because I've struggled with boundaries and not my strong suit. When it comes to people, I just say yes, 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 which is another thing you're the queen of now. I know you're saying no. And to work, it's constant. Yeah. And you don't want to say no, and you don't want to put things in even if you know it's not healthy.
Well, so in the pandemic, we lost the physical boundary that would be between the office and home. Yes. And so when you lose that physical boundary, to have the headspace of being like, okay, switch off work, relax time now. A lot of people didn't have that anyway, even between office and home. So now that we're just at home, or if we stay this way, because even I was talking to a friend yesterday, she was like, we don't think we're going back to the office until 2022. And so being able to be like, okay, no, 6 o'clock, laptop off, 6 o'clock, or even just something like no laptops in the bedroom ever. Knowing those boundaries are important. And I just think every time I talk about work specifically, and especially workplace boundaries, they're like, well, you just don't know my boss. And I'm like, you really think your boss is the one exception to the rest of the world? Like, come on, all bosses are going to push that boundary. All bosses are going to take advantage. Yes, we can have a conversation about whether they should or not, but realistically, that conversation about whether they should is not going to change whether they do. And so what we need to have a conversation about is that, and I hate saying this because it's really blunt, but you are replaceable in your job.
Yeah.
And if you burn out tomorrow and have to quit or have to take 6 months off because you've burnt out, you will be replaced in less than a day. Like, whether it's either someone else taking your roles or an actual person is replacing your job, you will be replaced. So the only person who is going to protect you is you. And from a just very crude standpoint, I guess, a business's motivation is money. And so that's all they care about. They care about the bottom line. And yes, they should also care about more than that. But I mean, you can keep shoulding for the rest of your life and nothing's going to change. Or you can make sure that you are protected. And a lot of the time when we lack self-esteem around workplace stuff, what we do is we overcompensate with our time. So if we don't believe in the quality of work we're doing, we try to produce more in quantity. And in an office culture, how that displayed a lot of the time was presenteeism, where like they would sit at their desk all day just to prove that they're there. But I've actually started looking at it the other way, that actually it kind of proves you're incompetent, because if someone's doing it in like less time and leaving the office at 5 o'clock and you had to stay there till 9 o'clock, what exactly were you doing all day that you had to sit there till 9 o'clock but your colleague could leave at 5? And it's looking at that, and it's not efficient, it's not productive. And as a society, we've kind of taught everyone that we should have this way of working where like you turn on at 9, you turn off at 5. But a lot of people don't work like that. And I'm one of those people. And I think it's why our generation, I've just assumed you're the similar age to me.
I am.
Our generation has liked the freelance life more, because I like the fact that sometimes I get a burst of energy at 10 o'clock at night and I want to do some work. But I also like the fact that I'm not very good at working in the morning. I very rarely work before 12 o'clock. And I've actually started a new boundary in my life, which is very inconvenient for some of the people I work with, where I don't turn my phone on until 11 o'clock in the morning. But I love it, because that means from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock, if I do choose to work, I'm prioritizing what I need to do that day. And so it means I have 2 hours uninterrupted before anyone asks me for anything. Because the moment you turn your phone on, it's like, hey, can I get this? Hey, have you seen this email? And I'm like, okay, but what about what I needed to do today? And so it's about putting those boundaries in place. And ultimately, all boundaries are about protecting yourself and making sure you are safe and healthy.
100%. I mean, you kind of nailed it on the head, if I'm honest. And I know myself and so many others who have struggled with it. I'm a workaholic. Admittedly, I know half the time it isn't good for me. I'm working on it. It is something that is changing, but it's hard to find that. And I started freelancing at kind of 18, and as you say, freelance life. I had a lot of friends who thought I was kind of having a jolly all day long. An hour on work and then that's it. Bish bash bosh.
That is the biggest bugbear I have, where like, oh, well, you just sit at home all day, so you can come out for lunch. You know, when they have that 1 week off and they're like, oh, Michelle's free for lunch. And I'm like, you do realise I have a job. And they're like, no, but you're just at home. And I'm like, at work. And this is what I hope changes in the pandemic, that now when they go, oh, but you're just at home, I'm like, you were at home for a year. How did that feel? Did that feel like work, or were you just at home?
Oh yeah, boy's the tide changing. I agree. And it's so interesting. I had a lot of friends come to me at the beginning of the pandemic, and they were like, all of a sudden, they went from being like, oh, not all my friends, but some of them were like, you work here and there, you go out for lunch, or you'll go to do some post for an hour and a half because that's all you do kind of thing. And then they all kind of trickled in over the pandemic and said,
how are you doing this?
How do you manage this?
Yeah.
How the hell are you doing this? And I gave them certain tips, like my bedroom is my bedroom.
Yeah.
I don't work in my bedroom.
Me too.
Bedroom is for sleeping or
Yeah.
relaxing. And I spent years when I was younger working in my room, and I all of a sudden couldn't switch off or dissociate.
Also, you get a little bit older and your back starts hurting
Yeah.
if you work in your bed too much.
Literally.
That is one of the things I learned. But it took me about 2 years adjusting to working from home. So like when this pandemic started, obviously none of us predicted it would last this long, but I did have to constantly be telling my friends. It took me 2 years to fully get okay working from home. Like, we are only 3 months in at this point. Like, give yourself some time, give yourself some patience. You're going to need it. Like, it's the long road we're playing here.
Yeah. So obviously you released in, is it February?
Yeah.
The Joy of Being Selfish. And I mean, I know the title, it kind of sums up in a way what you're writing about, but how did you find the process of writing it? Obviously, you've clearly been practicing this for a long time. You're a life coach. You help other people fit into routines and better self-care routines. I don't mean routine as in like getting up at 7, going to the gym. I mean routine.
I have no routine in terms of that. Everyone's like, what's your morning routine? Don't know. It changes every day.
Exactly. I mean routine about looking after yourself. Yeah. It must have been, even though you kind of do this day in, day out, it must have been quite cathartic to get it down in a way into something that you can also not only use for other people but support yourself with, like a self kind of repeating it to yourself in a way.
It was a realization that I went, wow, I've grown a lot. Like, to go, I would say I've probably been on this boundary journey for about 5 years personally. I've known all the stuff. Whether I implement it in my life is obviously a different conversation. Even as a professional, we struggle with the same thing, where you can know something logically and rationally, but emotionally it takes a while, or like sometimes you're just a little bit too scared to set the boundary. But compiling all of the text, because there are a lot of text examples in my book, it was definitely a moment of going, wow, like I've grown. But also how I found those texts is I don't keep screenshots in my camera roll, so I was going through like all the WhatsApp medias in between my friends and like taking these like screenshots, and I was like, I've actually set a boundary in pretty much every area of my life. And the more I started writing, the more I was like, oh, and there was this moment that I said it, and there was this moment where I had to like draw my line and all these things. So when I started looking at all these texts, I think I also just realized that the greatest doubt I've ever had around boundaries is a lot of boundaries has meant I've lost a lot of friends in particular. And compiling those texts and writing the book actually just made me really secure in the fact that I made those right decisions, and that they were right decisions, even if I miss them, even if I think about them, still love them, all those things. It's made room for like better people in my life. And also, I won't lie, there are sometimes I delay setting a boundary. I'm not a perfect human. I always say, in terms of life coaching, I'm a human before I'm a life coach. And there are times I delay setting a boundary. But now, with the pressure of being the queen of boundaries and the pressure of having to write the book on it, I had a guy I was seeing on Monday who was like not messing me around, but definitely testing my boundaries. Yeah. And then I was just like, nope, we don't do this anymore. Nope, you're the queen of boundaries. You better put a boundary down. And the funny thing is, he actually knew about my job. Like, he knew. Very few guys I date know about my work, but he's the first one who I told like my book title and things like that. And he said like, oh, I find it so funny. You're a bit different how you are online and how you are offline.
What do you mean by that?
I've never had anyone say that to me. And so I was like, yeah, it's because you're pushing my boundaries and I've not said anything. So then I put the boundary down and he was like, oh yeah, sorry. And I was like, okay, yeah, like I let you a little bit of leeway, but you're not going to get very far with me anymore. Like I have a book to uphold. Like I have to stick to that standard, but also that standard works. Like everything I talk about in that book was such a hard learning curve that there is nothing and there is no one in my life who is worth it enough to slide back in terms of that.
Yeah.
And I do think once you start sliding a little bit, start budging a little bit, and I think the reason why I budged with him more than I probably should have or have in a while is because I've not been on a date like in the pandemic. So
Me neither.
it's been
a tough time.
Yeah, it's been a tough time, and it's been a year. And like pre-pandemic, I was going on 3 dates a week, so you get good at setting boundaries.
Yeah.
And then it'd been a year, and I've done a few video dates, and I did one in-person date last year, but not really. And so when you want something a bit more, your boundaries are harder to enforce.
Yes.
And so I kind of I let it go once or twice, and letting it go once or twice is actually what leads to you then being like, oh, I let it happen. But I share those stories because I don't ever want anyone to think I'm a perfect person who always has my boundaries in place. Like, not just in terms of boys, in terms of work, sometimes I'm just like, I mean, off, I was about to say off camera, but like off the podcast, I was telling you, like I was letting someone push my boundaries earlier today. I do eventually set my boundaries. I do it a lot faster than I did it 2 years ago, 5 years ago. But I still get the same feelings any other person would have when setting boundaries, which is sometimes fear, sometimes anxiety, sometimes like, oh, I don't know how they're going to respond. I don't want them to think I'm rude. I still have those same thoughts. The only difference is that I now have such a breadth of life experience to show that it's always worth it, even if they react negatively.
Yeah. I find it so interesting because I think you're right. For me, like the anxiety of telling someone, even when you know they're completely out of line, perhaps by what they're doing. But I always think it's like kids, isn't it? When you're looking after your friend's child and they're toddler age, and they say, "Oh, I want this," and you're saying, "No, let's take." When you make dinner, and they say, "I don't like this.
Yeah,
I want another thing," and then you kind of go, "No," and eventually go, "Do you know what? You just got to eat. So fine, I'll make another thing."
Yeah.
And then instantly in their head,
they're like, "Great, I can do that again.
I can do it again." And I find that so interesting that we as adults do that still.
I even think about this in terms of my brother's puppy. So my brother's puppy bites no one else, only bites me. And I am the biggest dog person in my entire family. And so like anytime it bites me, I was always like, oh, it's fine, it's fine. And then I just got annoyed because I was like, why is she only biting me? And my brother was like, you're the only one who lets her bite her. And then the whole rule is like they bite you, you're meant to stop playing with them. And I want to keep playing because like I'm such a dog person and I'm like, I keep playing. That's essentially boundary setting, but with a dog. And so as a result, the puppy now doesn't bite anyone else in the family, literally only bites me.
But you know, you're right, it's such an interesting kind of like idea to it, and I think it's tough to put in place. And when you say that you have times where you're human, I would be worried if you didn't. I think even when you are the queen of your trade and you're doing everything right and you're helping others, I would be concerned if you weren't. You can't follow everything to the exact same, I want to say standard, but that's not right because you're still setting a standard.
No, so I think the difference I like to emphasize is like in the book, if you think about it, I wrote a book and also it got edited and all of that. So the examples you have in the book, yes, are word for word what I actually said to my friends, especially the things in text boxes. But a lot of the stuff around that is the perfect way to set boundaries. How it actually happens in real life is it's messy. And like, there are times, and the examples I use are largely the simplest boundaries that have been set. But some of the examples in my real life, I couldn't include in the book because I was like, it's a little bit too messy. It's a bit too complicated. It's not really proving my point. But that's actually how boundaries are set in person. It's messy and it's complicated. And I do write that in the book that like, if you're expecting to have this perfect conversation, the one that I outline in the book, remember that the one I outline in the book is after 4 or 5 years of experience. I didn't give you, I've given bad examples in the book, like when I first set the boundary for the first time, and none of those were perfect. And a lot of the time, I mean, if I think about one of the examples specifically, I use an example where I felt I ended a friendship, but it was a friendship that had a mutual friend as well, and the mutual friend wasn't adjusting very well with that. And it wasn't even an argument, the conversation where she was trying to convince me to be friends with that other person again. She said, if you're this unforgiving, you're never going to find a boyfriend. And when I tell people that, they're like, oh, how could she? That's such an awful. This is to this day one of my closest friends, and people say things like that. Like, I know it's an awful thing to hear. I know, ripped out of context, like, people are like, oh, how can someone speak to you like that? I'm sorry, if you go through your own life, some friends have said some horrible things to you too. Like, this is not how, we're not creating perfect humans. We don't have perfect relationships. Someone can say that and I can fully forgive them. And it's funny because, like, I actually saw her last week and I was like, we talked about the fact it was in the book, and she was like, I hate that's the thing that, like, people know about me now. And I was like, no one knows it's you. Yeah. And it's not what I think about you when I think of you as a friend. Like, it was one thing that happened. You really think, like, we've been friends since we were 11 years old. I'm 27. Like, 16 years of friendship, we've had one thing where you said something not that nice. Like, and we got over it because I set my boundary. It never happened again. Like, if anything, I think it's a sign of stronger friendship that what that happened maybe 4 years ago, she's never said anything like that since. And we even had a conversation last week saying, like, I understand she thinks I'm an unforgiving person, but, like, my standard for forgiveness is very different to hers. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily speak badly of me, because it could also be that she's too forgiving, but we're allowed to have different standards of forgiveness, and you're allowed to be a more forgiving person, and I'm allowed to be a less forgiving person, but it doesn't mean one of us is wrong or right. And so I think we have to remove this idea of perfection around boundary setting, but also the reason why I share it is what you said about being a professional. So there's this illusion in the personal development industry, whether you're a psychologist, therapist, or life coach, that you have your life all sorted. Yeah. And I don't think it's helpful to the client. No. And anytime I've worked with anyone, I'm not coming from a position of I have a perfect life, because if you think about it, and I sometimes think, especially within traditional psychology, this is a model that is very much pushed. If it comes from the perception that one person is perfect and knows everything, the pressure to not say something like, I don't know, I'll look that up and get back to you, is really hard on that person, on the professional. And then more so, what it does is it creates a power imbalance. Yeah. So if, and I've had moments myself with this happening as the client, when a therapist or a life coach says something that doesn't sit right with you or doesn't feel right with you, there needs to not be a power balance in place so that you can go, no, that's not exactly how I feel, and explain, oh, this is actually how it makes me feel. But if there's a power in place where almost the therapist or the psychologist or the life coach is the expert, then you actually sit down, shut up, and don't say anything, and you're the one who's correct. So I always work from a point of view, and this is actually not just around personal development. I think this about doctors and personal trainers as well. You are the expert in your own body. There is that expert, that professional can actually do nothing without words coming out of your mouth and you translating the experience you're already going through. So you are the expert because they cannot be in the room, and another person can replace them. They can't replace you. Yeah. So that's the part which I think you need to empower a client by making them realize that they're not sitting in front of a perfect person. And I think that's also where, when you think you're sitting in front of a perfect person, a person will feel perceptions of judgment. They aren't being judged. Anyone good at their job would not be judging them. But if you think you're sitting in front of someone who has never got it wrong, then it's very easy to feel like you're the fuck up and you're the mess.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting in how you put it like that. I mean, I know it's taken years of work to kind of put that analogy into place and have it like that. And I think you know yourself best. I agree. And that's, my mum has always said, when it comes to my health, sometimes you get doctors who've said to me, no, that cannot possibly happen. When it does happen, and then they find out at the end, oh yeah, okay, your body does work that way, and my mum says, you know you best. And I think, although I've never necessarily come across, been personally, I had like a life coach or anything like that. When it comes to, I've got bipolar, so I have, therapies coming out of every area, put it that way, and therapists, apologies. And one of my best, not even just my favorite, but one of the best psychologists and therapists I ever had. She was really neutral. She was quiet and she listened. like, obviously that people think that's your job. They are supposed to do that. But you say with that idea of power play, I'd never thought much into that. And I never felt with her that she was the one with the degree or this and this. It was, I sit in the room and it was this balance. And I think that's so hard to find. And I don't think people think about that very much.
Well, I think it's the fact that I originally came from traditional psychology. So I do have a psychology bachelor's.
Oh, wow.
I didn't want to go into masters, and I didn't want to go down that route because I found I didn't like the rules myself, because I didn't think it helps people. And one of the rules that I got taught a lot is like, you never share about yourself as the professional.
Yes. Yeah.
And obviously, like, I have gone quite extreme in the other direction as a life coach now. Like, I mean, I'm probably the rare life coach that like has so much of their personal life out there. But it's because that's like, especially because I do this like weird online life coaching now, where like so much of my life coach work is on social media. I think you can teach people by the examples in your own life. It's why I wrote the book the way I wrote the book, because with the actual text examples I have, because I remember sitting in my life coach's office and being like, it was around a specific guy, and I couldn't physically set the boundary. And I kept saying, I literally don't know what words need to come out of my mouth. It was like learning a new language. And I was like, I need to have example sentences in my head, and it's basic English. Like, English is my first language. Like, I should be able to say it. But like her saying something like, when he says this, you say, please don't speak to me like that, was revolutionary, because it never occurred to me to formulate that sentence and say it, or that I was allowed to say it. And so it was moments like that of, okay, but how do you like literally set a boundary? What are the words that need to come out of my mouth? Which is why the book is full of text examples from my own life, because I didn't want to use a like template or a perfect example. I wanted to show that like every time I set a boundary, it's slightly different language, but there are key components. So for example, I use, this isn't going to work for me a lot, but I will make it personal. And so I'm also very careful when boundary setting that it's not like, you don't want to ever feel like you're talking to a robot. So it has to be like, even if it's ending a relationship. So let's say you go on 3 dates, I will usually say, like, it was really nice getting to know you. I hope your meeting next week goes well. Like, I will put personal things in. It's not a copy and paste text I send to every guy when I'm ending it, because it needs to be personal, because otherwise it loses that sentimental part, which actually makes it easier to swallow and easier to digest, because you feel like you're actually talking to that person rather than talking to their therapist.
I think you need that. I personally cannot imagine. I mean, I find I have to relate, you know, when you have conversations with your friends and they ask you advice or that you're trying to understand, to relate to yourself. I think that's number one, human, but I think that's necessary. I think you have to be able to relate to someone. And even when you're sat with an expert, you know, I don't care if you're my psychiatrist, my psychologist, whoever you are, as you say about them being a robot, you know, that's not that might in their head be their job, but their job is to support you.
Yeah.
And to do that, people need to be able to relate, I think. So I think that is, I think that's crystal clear, and I think that's the way it should be. I know, you know, the book came about from a New Year's resolution. New Year's resolution. That's kind of where it all. What was the moment where you were like, you know, the penny dropped, and you were like, I've got to write this down?
So it was actually when I decided I wanted to turn it into a book, or when I decided I need to start setting boundaries.
They're both good. We'll go with the book bit. We'll go with the book.
So the book came because, you know what? It was just working up the nerve to actually be able to be that person to write the book on boundaries.
Yeah.
Like my life in terms of boundaries had to be pretty much solid to get to that point. Yeah. And so even though now I've realized there's no perfection, I don't need to be perfect in it, like, I had to be pretty solid. Like, if you think about the number of questions I've had on boundaries in the last, like, 3 months, especially in interviews, and, like, people throwing me every kind of question under the sun, I can wholeheartedly say I can answer any single question on boundary that you have. And with a informed, educated standpoint.
Yeah.
And it took me 2 years. So it's about 2-3 years from my last book. And I won't lie, I put out so many manuscripts and proposals for random other ideas. And there was just something about, so to be honest, I was actually going to quit. So I had put out maybe 4 manuscripts, all had been rejected, all had been like, she's not an expert in that, she's an expert in body positivity, which was my first book. And I was like, oh, can you stop pigeonholing me? Like, I'm not just able to do one thing. I am a qualified life coach, so can we talk about something else, please? And I was getting, like, you could hear it in my voice. Like, I was just getting more and more wound up that, like, the industry saw me a certain kind of way. And I was like, I'm not one thing. I'm not, like, I kept saying one trick pony. Why does everyone think I'm a one trick pony? Like, I'm a qualified expert, but people can only really see my body and my scars and my surgeries and all of these things that were in my past. And so I had pretty much given up. And then my social media agent, who knows nothing about books, was like, oh, so do you have an update on books? What's happening with all the manuscripts that you sent out? And I was like, I don't know. Don't talk to me about it. Talk to me in a few years. And he was like, I'll give you a few months. And I don't know what it was about that conversation. I went to bed and I woke up, was like, okay, if I wrote one more book, what would it be on? And it was like the word boundaries just popped in my head. And then at the moment it did, I kind of went, I'm such an idiot. All I've been talking about online is boundaries all day, every day. Why did it not occur to me to write a book on boundaries? So then I sent an email to my literary agent that morning and I was like, okay, so last shot, boundaries. Should we write a book on it? And she was like, oh my God, everyone calls you the queen of boundaries. This all makes it. And I'm not even joking. The moment I started writing the proposal, it just, everything clicked. The energy in it, the like, when the proposal was finished, I was like, this is something, this is going somewhere. And it's actually changed 100% how I go about my career altogether, because I realized I need to have that energy behind it. Otherwise, why am I doing it? Like, I don't want to publish a book for the sake of publishing a book. I want to publish a book because I care about it so much. I mean, it's exactly why the beginning of this year has been such an emotional roller coaster, because I've really cared about this book, which is a really good thing. But it also means you have so much of your time and heart and energy in it. But that was the epiphany around it. And also just... And then, of course, as the moment I got the book deal, all I was getting online was, can you write a book about boundaries? And I was like, could you guys have said this 2 years ago? Because, like...
I needed it.
Yeah, it didn't occur to me. And then, obviously, I had to sit on a secret for, like, 10 months. I think I announced it in, 8 months. So I announced it in October. But I got the book deal on Valentine's Day, which is actually my favourite day of the year. So it was all very fortuitous and, like, perfect timing.
Oh, I love that. I think, but most of the best ideas come from moments like that. I don't think they're necessarily planned. They're more like an epiphany. And
also then I think a lot of the time it's like an epiphany, and then you're like, why didn't I think of that sooner? And you're like, oh, well, that was obvious. Why didn't I think about that? 100%. But in terms of setting boundaries, it happened actually even before I got my own life coach. So my life coach has been a pivotal part of this journey. She's the one who taught me boundaries. I've been working with her for about 6 years, but it was probably about 2 years before that it occurred to me there was a problem in my life. So it took about 2 years before I actually did something about it.
What was that moment where you kind of thought, uh-oh?
It was 2 moments that happened very close together. One, I was at a birthday dinner for a friend, and my boyfriend had texted me or called me, and I hadn't picked up the phone. And so when I saw my phone, and he had gone for like WhatsApp, Facebook message, and like multiple different mediums, and I was like, and texted me, and I was like, so obviously when I looked at my phone, I was worried, and I was like, hey, are you okay? Sorry, I'm just at dinner. And he was like, oh, that's strange. You're usually at my beck and call. He literally didn't want anything important. It was just the fact that he was so unused to me not replying immediately.
And he put it like that?
And it was the word beck and call. And I'm not even joking. Have you ever had like someone say something to you and it like reverberates in you and you've never been able to forget it? Yeah. It was that. And then about a week later, I got into a fight with all my housemates. We were in the final year of uni and like in the final months. And tensions had been building, and then we were all revising, doing our dissertations, and then there was one big blow up argument. And in that argument, one of the housemates had said, do you know how much we have to tolerate living with you? And
Oh my God.
Really weirdly after that, I saw a quote on Instagram that said, like, don't surround yourself with people who just tolerate you. You deserve people who celebrate you.
I'm straight.
But, like, you know how everyone gives Instagram quotes such shit? I was like, no, that was a light bulb in my life. I saw it in that moment and just went, oh my God. Like, and I think it was like sometimes you just need, my life coach says, that bus to hit you.
Yeah.
Like, it was like, it was that moment of being like, every single person in my life does not respect me. Every single person in my life treats me horribly, and I do not deserve this.
Yeah.
But I think it all needed to happen together for me to be like, and not every single person. Like, I mean, after that argument, I went to a friend's house and he was a great friend for me in that moment. But like, it was kind of that thing of like too many and too much, and it's been happening too long. Like, now's time to do something about it.
Chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah, exactly.
No, and I can't imagine, because in a way it's those moments hurt, you know.
Yeah.
There's your whole life in that, and people who read the book will read a quote. As you say, quotes are great, and I agree. Instagram's great for quotes. There are so many where I'm like, yeah, whatever, and then there's some where it hits me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, that's how I feel, and I couldn't vocalize that.
Yeah, puts words to it.
Yeah, and sometimes in life, you know, these things build up, and although they hurt, something good comes out of the wreckage.
Well, I think I've always forgiven myself as long as I learn the lesson from it. And so it's not anything I hold on to. To be honest, the person who said she tolerated me, I didn't particularly want to live with her either. And the boyfriend who said I was at his beck and call, I was at his beck and call.
Yeah.
Like, and that's my own... I don't want to say fault, because I think there's so much self-blame that happens anyway. But like, I think I needed to take accountability for the fact that I didn't set boundaries. So, of course, he thought that he could do whatever he wanted. Yeah. But realistically, I went into that relationship as well being like, we're not going to last 6 months tops. Like, who gets into a relationship like that? Makes no sense. So, but I'm going to say all of this with a disclaimer. This happened when I was 20 years old. I have learned, and I wasn't even a life coach at that point. So it was, you just need that wake-up call sometimes, and that was mine.
Yeah, I think people are going to read this first of all, and they're going to hopefully hear this, and it is going to kind of resonate with them. You know, I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, well, I could have put a boundary in there, and I really should speak to that person. And it's not I think that you get to a point where you just have no more energy.
Yes.
You know, you are bloody exhausted. I feel it a lot of the time. You know, I'm 26 this year, and you just get to this point where you're kind of like, I don't have the energy for this anymore. It's draining me. Yeah. And I think lockdown has not helped with that, because, you know, there are certain situations where I kind of let things slide a lot. Yeah. And I think I'll just let this one slide, just this one.
Yeah.
And then if you think about
it's never one.
There's a hell of a lot. There's a big closet full of things that have slided, you know, and I think this is going to resonate with them, and they're going to find a bit of strength and willpower to say, I'm worth a bit more than that, you know, at least a bit more than that.
I mean, fingers crossed, because I think also what happened in the pandemic is our emotional capacities were reduced. Yeah. And so you need to start choosing more between things, because you don't have the energy to do all of them. And I think a lot of the initial roadblocks around setting boundaries is believing you deserve to set boundaries. And so as much as those are like those light bulb moments now, I won't lie, at the time, I mean, the reason why it took me 2 years to do anything about it was me at the time, I probably laughed it off. Like, especially the beck and call one, I remember me being like, my boyfriend's a dick, like, and then just like carrying on with life. Yeah. And it's only in hindsight I'm now like, that wasn't okay, that wasn't acceptable, don't speak to me like that. Yeah. But because I have boundaries now, whereas like back then I just thought like that's the best I could get, and like that's so sad. Like, because everyone deserves better than that. And even if anyone's listening and that's not the exact words that were being used towards you, like, you cannot feel better about yourself, you cannot have self-esteem if you're surrounding yourself by people who treat you badly.
Yeah, 100%. You nailed it in one sentence. And I'm certainly going to take a few things away from this. Maybe I'll reevaluate my whole life. Maybe I won't have time for that today, but I do, even just hearing that, I think people need to hear things sometimes that are the hard truth. And I don't think it's easy. I can't even imagine how difficult it must have been to say to people, which is not because you're being unfair. You're not being unfair at all, but kind of laying it on the line like, this isn't going to work.
So if people are used to you taking advantage of you, it comes as a massive shock when they can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
I think I have one example in the book where I talk about a friend who cancelled on me 5 times, but because we'd been friends for like 6 years and she was very used to like me not being serious about like, because it was closer to ultimatums that I used to set or like threats. And then when I actually set the boundary, and a lot of people ask me the difference between an ultimatum and a threat is, well, threat, you have no intention of following through. Ultimatum, it's about their behavior, and boundaries are about your standards.
Yeah.
So when I set the boundary and I said, if you cancel me on another time, we're not going for lunch again. And she cancelled on me and then went, but like cancelled, not properly cancelling, didn't even apologise, and went like, oh, I got Monday confused with Tuesday, so Tuesday's good, right? And I was like, no. Do you remember when, but also I was like, do you remember when I said if you cancel we're not doing lunch again? I meant that. And then like it turned into a horrible conversation. You can read about it in the book. But she didn't think I was serious. That's what it came down to. Was she didn't think I was serious. She had a years worth of experience of me not being serious. And when I drew the line, a lot of people are like, well, then you should give her a second chance because, and I was like, no, this was already the 5th chance.
Yeah.
Like, and then also, if you think about it, anyone who would do that anyway, or in the first place, doesn't respect you.
Yeah.
So like a lot of people go, oh, but I now know you're serious, so give me another chance. And I'm like, why did you not take me seriously the first place? Yes, I should have enforced it the first place, but you should have also taken me seriously the first time.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't have had to take me being serious to then, that's not the first chance. That is the 5th chance.
Yeah. Well, I think hopefully people will, I mean, I'm sat here because so much of I'm sat here a bit dumbfounded because so much of this I'm sat thinking, oh, yeah, maybe I should think more about this.
It's okay. We all have boundaries we need to set, me included.
100%.
I'm setting one right after this as well.
Well, I think that's such a lovely way to end it. And I mean, I've learned so much from this already, and I'm hoping that when people listen to this, maybe if they don't learn anything or whatever, they'll at least consider their worth and, as you say, their standards.
Yes.
And I think that is the best thing. A lot of good can come from that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being part of an episode, our first episode back in the studio.
Oh, this is so lovely.
I know, it's good to not be on Zoom. I must admit, I've been pining to just leave the house.
I know,
at any
me
point.
too. And it's so nice to actually be able to talk in person. I always think podcast recordings are so much nicer in person.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.